couple of weeks ago, there was an article in Variety about a rumored Obi-Wan Kenobi movie, and it included a single line indicating that a Jabba the Hutt movie was also in early development. Now, it didn't take long for the internet to declare that this was an idiotic idea and that Disney had lost its way. While some people did seem excited about the idea, there was a lot of pushback on Twitter about it. Sure, some of this is just Twitter being Twitter, but there also seemed to be some people in the media who were jumping on the bandwagon, such as the people over at Screen Junkies News, who were quick to dismiss the idea.
Jabba the Hutt movie is literally, I think, the worst idea possible.
Yeah, this is a stupid idea. This is the worst idea.
The worst idea possible? Really? Why were so many people so quick to dismiss this idea? I think part of it might be that in the years since Return of the Jedi was released, Jabba has become a punchline and a caricature. But for people seeing him for the first time in 1983, he was pretty incredible. Not only was he physically impressive, he clearly had a huge amount of power. People feared him and obeyed him, but why? How did a slug-like alien who could apparently barely move get to the top of the criminal underworld? Wouldn't you like to know more about that? I know I would. In the late 90s, Dark Horse Comics released 4 standalone comics about Jabba's life leading up to the events of Return of the Jedi. And while I'm not suggesting that these exact stories be used, they are a great example of how Jabba could be the protagonist in a story. These comics really show off how crafty and ruthless Jabba was, and go a long way toward explaining how he got to where he was. Many of the stories also show him taking a more active role in things, whether by moving around on a floating disc, or jumping on people to kill them, or even swallowing them whole. If you're still skeptical, let me address a few of the specific criticisms that people have made. First of all, there are literally dozens of characters in Jabba's palace that only made a very brief appearance on screen, so even if you stuck pretty close to the palace era, the idea that there would be nothing new in a Jabba movie seems kind of laughable. But depending on when the movie is set, it could have lots of new characters. But the thing is, having a familiar character like Jabba helps to draw people in and makes it feel more like Star Wars. And people like to know more about their favorite characters. And there's no denying that a story set in the galaxy's criminal underworld would be quite a bit different and hopefully darker than what Star Wars has given us in the past. At first glance, this does seem to be a bit of a problem. They're probably not going to subtitle an entire Star Wars film, especially since Star Wars caters at least partially to kids, who might not have the reading skills required to follow an entire movie in subtitles. That said, it's not as though Star Wars has any shortage of key characters who speak literally not a word of English. You get the point. None of these characters has ever had subtitles, and yet we can still understand what they're trying to communicate. And just because the movie is centered on Jabba doesn't necessarily mean that it'll have the most screen time. One example of this would be The Godfather. It was ostensibly the story of Don Corleone, and it was even named after him, but he wasn't really the main character. They could make the real protagonist a companion character of some kind who does speak English, or Galactic Basic as they call it. And beyond that, Star Wars lore says that Hutts actually can speak Galactic Basic, but they prefer not to. Jabba's Uncle Zero spoke English, and Jabba himself even spoke a few words of English in Return of the Jedi. So I could probably accept it if they just had him speak English, as long as the voice sounded appropriate. Yeah, I can't really argue with this, but I think there were 2 reasons behind it. Some of the blame for the terrible Jabba from the special edition of A New Hope can be placed on the relatively primitive state of CGI at the time, and they did improve it somewhat in later versions, and finally in The Phantom Menace, where the model had improved quite a bit. Now that it's possible to use CGI to literally resurrect dead actors, I don't think there are any technical hurdles in the way anymore. But it can't be denied that Jabba still looks very different in these movies than he did in Return of the Jedi. I think George Lucas was frustrated by the puppet in Return of the Jedi and wanted Jabba to be more expressive, so he intentionally altered Jabba's design to make that possible. Now that George is out of the picture, I'm hoping that Disney will walk that back and give us something that's a little bit more like what we saw in Return of the Jedi. I'll admit that I'm a little bit biased when it comes to Jabba, and it's certainly possible that this movie will crash and burn faster than Jabba's sail barge. But I think dismissing the idea of a Jabba the Hutt movie out of hand shows a real lack of imagination. I haven't agreed with how Disney has handled every aspect of Star Wars, but generally speaking, they know what they're doing. For the moment, let's just keep an open mind. I hope I've shown that there are lots of approaches they could use to create a very interesting movie about Jabba, and one that's unlike what we've seen from Star Wars movies in the past. I, for one, can't wait to learn more. Thanks for watching.